Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Homage to the Blessed One, the Worthy One, the Supremely Enlightened One. Meritorious devotees, today we are learning the Ariyapariyesana Sutta in Majjhima Nikaya. In the first session, we discussed how the Buddha elaborated, the way he elaborated these points. The first one is, if I remind you again the story, the Buddha was invited by Venerable Ananda to visit the Ramaka Brahmin's monastery, so that there were a set of bhikkhus who wanted to listen to a Dhamma talk by the Buddha. So they had not listened to a Dhamma talk for a long time, so they asked Venerable Ananda to ask the Buddha to visit a place and deliver them a Dhamma talk. So the Venerable Ananda invited the Buddha for a Dhamma talk, and we learnt about noble silence. We learned that we should not disturb a person if he's reading a book or listening to a Dhamma talk, because that is the time when the Buddha is speaking to him. And we learnt about the things. We learnt a few points. First, we learnt the three aspects of sankara: uppado panyayati, vayo panyayati, tita sanyatattam panyayati. What they mean, we learnt. The first point that the Buddha told us about is that about birth. He said that we are subject to birth, and we go on search for things that are subject to birth. And he said that it is an ignoble search, something which is not great. Then he said we are subject to old age, and we go on search for the things which are subject to old age. And he said that too is an ignoble thing, something which is not great. Then he said we are subject to sickness, and we go on search for things that are subject to sickness. And then he said, being subject to death, we go on search for the things that are subject to death. And being subject to sorrow, we go on search for the things that are subject to sorrow. And and he said, as the last point, being subject to being defiled, we go on search for the things that are subject to being defiled. So then he said the things he brought in front of us, the things that are subject to old age, birth, death, sickness, sorrow, and being defiled. What are the things? These are the things: wives and children, servants and workers, sheep and goats, pigs, cows, elephants, cows, horses, mares, all of these things. He said these things are subject to birth, old age, sickness, and death, sorrow, and they're subject to being defiled. And he said these things, now people go on search for these things, and he said that it is an ignoble search, something which is not great. Even though we search for these things, it doesn't make us great. Now, coming back to the sutta, now this is the time he goes on explaining about the quest of greatness, becoming a great being. He said, "Dear bhikkhus, what does it mean when you say going in search for greatness, the quest of greatness? Dear bhikkhus, there can be a person now, he thinks, being a person who is subject to birth, he sees the dangers of being subject to birth. Now, seeing the danger here, in a sense, we experience all the physical and mental pain because we are born into this world. Now, karma is a deciding factor of our next birth. We are here in this human world because in one of our past lives we did a merit. Now that merit was enough to it pushed us into the human world. So that's why we are here in this human world now. Now, even though the human world is a place of happiness, sorrow is there as well. Physical pain, mental pain is there. It's present. And now, for the time being, this is a safe place, but we can't stay here forever. There are bad destinations, 4 bad destinations are there. So once our time here is over, then we will have to accept our next life, whether we like it or not. We do not know what's it going to be, our next life. Whether we like it or not, we will have to accept it. According to the karma that we have done, we will be reborn. So the Buddha said, seeing the dangers. Now, the danger of being born again is that what would happen if we are born in hell? There is endless pain over there. Again and again we die, we are born again there. Again we die, we are born again in hell. See, it is a place we should not be in. Certainly samsara as a whole is not a place that we should be in or continue the journey in. So, seeing the dangers of birth, what he does is that he thinks like this. He expects, so he has an expectation of achieving Nibbana, where there is no pain at all, free of all suffering, where there is no birth, that incomparable state of Nibbana. He goes on search for it. So, the difference between the person who is subject to birth and who goes in search of ignoble things, and the person who is subject to birth and goes in search for the Nibbana is that the person who goes in search for the Nibbana, first he sees the dangers of birth. when you see the dangers of birth, there will be an urge inside your heart to go in search for Nibbana. So this is another important point. Now, if we want to achieve Nibbana, if we want to step forward, walk towards Nibbana, then there is one thing that we have to do, and that is to see the dangers of these things. Seeing the dangers of these things, that is birth, old age, death, sorrow, it helps us achieve, or help us at least to start learning Dhamma. So, the second thing that he does is that he's subject to, there can be a person, he's subject to sickness. But what he does is that the difference is that he sees the dangers of sickness, and he goes in search for Nibbana, where there is no sickness, the place free of all suffering. He sees the dangers of death, the nature of death, and goes in search for the state of Nibbana where there is no death. So he sees the dangers of sorrow, and he goes in search for that Nibbana where there is no sorrow, that incomparable state of Nibbana. Being subject to being defiled, he goes in search for Nibbana where there is no defilements and where there is no suffering. The Buddha said, "Dear bhikkhus, this is the quest of greatness." So the quest of greatness is when a person sees the dangers of these things, these points, and goes in search for enlightenment. And enlightenment is understanding the Four Noble Truths. The path to enlightenment is the Eightfold Path. Now, the Buddha gives us an account of his quest of greatness here. He says, "Dear bhikkhus, even I, before becoming a Buddha, as a Bodhisattva, a Buddha to be, when I was living as a Bodhisattva, a life of a Buddha to be, I was subject to birth, and I was searching for things that were subject to birth. I was subject to old age, and I was searching for things that were subject to old age. I was subject to sickness, and I was in search for things which were subject to sickness. I was subject to death, and I searched for the things which were subject to death. I was subject to sorrow, and I was in search. I searched for the things which were subject to death, sorrow. And he said, I was subject to be defiled, and I was in search for the things that were subject to being defiled. But I thought like this, he said. Being a person who is subject to birth, why do I search for the things that are subject to birth? being a person who is subject to old age, why do I need to search for the things that are subject to old age? Being a person who dies, what is the point of searching for the things that are subject to death? Being a person who is subject to sorrow, what is the point of searching for the things that are subject to sorrow? Being a person who gets defiled, what is the point of searching for the things that get defiled? So, the Buddha says here, so I saw the dangers of birth. I saw the dangers of old age. I saw dangers of sorrow. I saw the dangers of death, sorrow, defilements, and decided to go in search for the Nibbana, where there is no suffering, that incomparable state where there is no suffering. So he went in search for the Nibbana, the enlightenment. So that is the quest of greatness. Then the Buddha says here, dear bhikkhus, after some time, now before he went forth back at home, he thought, he contemplated on the dangers of these things. So his mind was inclined to Nibbana. Then he said, his mind was inclined to Nibbana. Then he said, now here he says, when I was in my youth, when I had black hair, in that beautiful era, in my first years of my lifetime, when my parents were reluctant to, and when they were in tears, when they were crying, I cut my hair and my beard. I took a robe, I wore a robe and went forth and became a recluse, he said. So he went forth. So he was in the quest of Nibbana. The Buddha says here, when I became a monk, I was in search for wholesome things. I was in search for the deathless state, that which is called Nibbana. I went to Ariyapariyesana. So he met Ariyapariyesana, and I said him this, dear Kalama, I would like to be in your teachings and doctrine, live in your teachings and your code of conduct. I would like to follow your teachings. I would like to follow your code of conduct, he said. So after some time, dear bhikkhus, Ariyapariyesana said this to me, dear friend, then this Dhamma is there for you. For a wise person, in a short period of time, it is possible for him to understand this Dhamma. Dear bhikkhus, in a short amount of time, I learned that Dhamma. Now this is Dhamma that Ariyapariyesana taught. The Buddha says, I learned that Dhamma. and I learned their wheel of Dhamma, the type of Dhamma. And I became a person who knows, who sees that Dhamma. Now this is the Dhamma that Ariyapariyesana knew. And the others told about the same thing about me as well. That means here the Buddha says, now he became a person who sees the Dhamma. He became a person who saw that Dhamma, and he became a person who understood that Dhamma. Even the fellow students of Ariyapariyesana, they said that the Buddha to be knew that Dhamma. That means he understood it quickly. Then he thought like this. Ariyapariyesana, Ariyapariyesana says this Dhamma not out of faith. He's not just preaching. He has understood it and he has achieved it. If he is a person who has got to know about this Dhamma, who sees this Dhamma. So, dear bhikkhus, I went to Ariyapariyesana and I asked him this. Dear Kalama, to what extent have you achieved this Dhamma? So, dear bhikkhus, Ariyapariyesana told me Akinchanyayatana, the concentration of Akinchanyayatana. It is a deep concentration. Akinchanyayatana. So Ariyapariyesana had achieved Akinchanyayatana. So he was preaching about Akinchanyayatana. So our Buddha to be, Gautama Buddha to be, learnt that Dhamma. Learned that Dhamma in a sense. He learned the methods of practice. Then the Buddha says here, the bhikkhus, I thought this. It is not just Ariyapariyesana is capable of achieving this Dhamma. It is possible for me too. I can achieve it. I have effort. I have strength. I have concentration. I am mindful. So it is possible for me too. So he kind of encouraged himself. And he put an effort to understand this Dhamma that Ariyapariyesana understood. Now here he says, the Buddha says, dear bhikkhus, in a short while, in few days, I understood that Dhamma and I was living in that Dhamma. Dear bhikkhus, I went to Ariyapariyesana and I said this, dear Kalama, is this just it? Is this the Dhamma that you have understood? Don't you have anything beyond this? Then Ariyapariyesana replied, this is the Dhamma that I have understood, and I haven't got anything beyond this. So the Buddha said, dear friend, whatever you have understood, I have understood as well. Then Ariyapariyesana said, in delight, is that so? That is great. Friend, this is such a nice thing. it is a gain for us just to see a person who has understood this Dhamma. The Dhamma that I have understood, I'm seeing a person who has understood this Dhamma. Whatever I have understood, you have understood. The way I am, so you are. The way you are, so I am, Ariyapariyesana said. So, dear friend, come now. Let's get together and look after this assembly, he said. That means his students. So, dear bhikkhus, my teacher, Ariyapariyesana, kept me in the same position. I was his student, but he kept me in the same position as a teacher and worshipped me, venerated. But dear bhikkhus, I thought, this Dhamma that I've understood. Now what is this Dhamma that the Buddha has understood? It is Akincanyayatana, the same thing that Ariyapariyesana understood. It doesn't help me to understand the Four Noble Truths. This doesn't help me achieve Nibbana, the enlightenment. This is just there for a birth in Akincanyayatana world, he thought. Dear bhikkhus, then I realized that what I was searching for was not there in that place. So I left that place. Again, dear bhikkhus, I was in search for wholesome things. And I was in search for Nibbana, the deathless state. And I met Ramaputta Uddaka. I told him this, dear friend, I would like to be in your doctrine and your code of conduct. Dear bhikkhus, Ramaputta Uddaka said to me, fine friend, do practice in this code of conduct. For a wise person, and in a very short period of time, it is possible to understand this Dhamma, learn this Dhamma, understand this Dhamma, and live in this Dhamma. So he said that. Dear bhikkhus, and in a short period of time, very quickly, I learned that Dhamma. And I became an elder in that Dhamma. I became a person who knew that Dhamma, and the others told the same thing about me as well. Dear bhikkhus, then I thought like this. It is not just Rama. Rama is not saying this thing out of faith. He has, by his own wisdom, developed wisdom, he has understood this Dhamma. He is a person who has understood this Dhamma. So I went to Ramaputta Uddaka and I asked him this, dear friend, for how far have you understood this Dhamma? Then, dear bhikkhus, Ramaputta Uddaka told me, up to Neva Sanya, Na Sanya, then the concentration of Neva Sanya, Na Sanya, then I have understood. Because I thought about it like this. It is not only Rama has faith, I have faith too. Not only Rama has effort, I have to. Concentration is there not only for Rama. I have concentration too. And wisdom, I have wisdom. It is not something there for Rama only. I have wisdom too. So if Rama has understood a Dhamma, and if he's living in that Dhamma, it is possible for me to understand and learn that Dhamma. So, the Buddha says here, dear bhikkhus, one day I went to Ramaputta Uddaka and I told him this. Dear friend, your father, Rama, did he, up to what extent did he understand this Dhamma? Is this the final destination? Then Ramaputta Uddaka said, my father. Now this Ramaputta Uddaka, the Putta means the son of Rama. That's why we called him Ramaputta Uddaka. This was passed down to Rama Putta by his father Rama. So he said, dear friend, yes, my father Rama, this is the final destination. This is the thing that he understood. Beyond this thing, that is beyond neva sanya na sanyayatana, he has not understood anything. Then the Buddha said, dear friend, whatever your father has understood, I have understood it as well. Then Ramaputta Uddaka became delighted. He said the same thing he praised the Buddha to be. He praised him. He said, we have such a gain. This is such a gain for us. It is so nice to see a person like you. Whatever that our father understood, you are living in it. So the Rama said, whatever my father knew, you know it now. Whatever you know now, my father knew it. So the same, both of you have achieved the same thing. The way the Rama is, the way so you are, the way you are, so is Rama, he said. So please do come. Let's get together and look after this assembly, Rama said. So the Buddha says here, dear bhikkhus, Ramaputta Uddaka treated me equally. He put me in the position of a teacher and venerated me. But I kept on thinking, this doesn't help me to achieve Nibbana. This doesn't help me to eradicate all suffering and to achieve wisdom. Then I thought, This is just there for the birth in Neva Sanya, Na Sanya in the world. So I left that place. Again I came into a place where I was searching. I was in the quest of greatness. I was searching for what is wholesome, and I was searching for Nibbana again. So we come to the end of the second session of the sutta. So by the Dhamma that we have learned today, we wish you would attain the supreme bliss of Nibbana in this Gautama Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.